Hi, I'm Sean,
I'm Vinay.
and this is Versus Football.
So we are on our final episode on the AFC East team needs, and we are talking about the reigning AFC East champion Buffalo Bills in this episode. Now, the Buffalo Bills don't really have a lot of needs. There is a reason they were the division champions this past year. They are arguably one of the best teams in the league right now. And so they don't really need to address a lot per se in the draft and through what's left of free agency. But just to be fair, we covered them and where they could reasonably improve relative to other good teams. And so we're basically going to start off with their defensive line, so their edge and their interior line. They're rather good on defense, but their edge could improve a little bit. They don't really get a lot of edge pressure through games, and it's currently a little bit lackluster, although they do have Ed Oliver, their 2019 first round draft pick, who does play pretty well. And they did spend their first pick in 2020. They did not have a first round pick in 2020 due to the Stephon Diggs trade, but their second round pick in 2020 was AJ Epinesa, the edge rusher out of Iowa, who was admirable in what he did play. He did face injuries occasionally, and he didn't record that many sacks. But whenever I did see Epinesa play, it felt like he was in the backfield a lot, and putting other guys on that defensive line should allow Epinesa to reach his potential.
Mhm.
They do have Vernon Butler, who seems to be a little bit overpaid due to his 2020 performance. If I can just pull up the stats, he didn't record a lot.
Yeah, in terms of Vernon Butler, I think his performance may not have necessarily merited his contract, 2-year, $15 million contract that he got. His first year was pretty lackluster, but releasing him could free up to like $8.3 million in cap savings that they can invest in other pass rushers, maybe even guys they can get in the draft. You'd only have about $1 million in dead cap, which even in a shrinking cap environment is, it's a pretty decent haul. It's not a whole lot. Uh, Jerry Hughes is another guy on the edge who had a pretty decent season with 54 pressures. They didn't pursue Carl Lawson like I probably thought they would, maybe because of the hefty price tag that came along with him. He was signed by the Jets on a relatively cheap deal with them. But what's cheap with them, what's cheap to the Jets with the amount of cap space they have, is not necessarily going to be cheap to the Bills with the limited amount of cap space that they had at the end of this past season. Because he had 64 regular season QB pressures, 10 more than Jerry Hughes. Mario Addison, he's respectable once again, but he's aging, and that's been a consistent theme for the Buffalo edge. They have a lot of guys that are solid and that are veteran presences, but too many of them are aging, and they haven't invested as of late in the edge position quite as much as they probably should have. He's been down in all D line categories in 2020 since he signed with the Bills from the Panthers, except for TFL solo tackles and passes defense, which he is marginally up on this year. Star Latulele, Brian Cox, Daryl Johnston, they're either old or inexperienced to the point where I don't think they're good enough for even a short-term investment for this edge that needs to put opposing offenses under a lot of pressure. Otherwise, you'll be scored on for 38 points like they were by Patrick Mahomes, which could have been more if Mecole Hardman hadn't fumbled in the end zone and gave up a touchdown to the Bills. That's a situation where you need a very strong edge. And I think a lot of analysts have edge or have Buffalo picking an edge prospect in the first round with the 29th, with the 30th overall pick. Some of the guys that are being projected to go there, mainly I've seen Aziz Ojulari, because a lot of the other guys are predicted to go much higher than 30th overall, namely Kwity Paye. He's predicted to go in the top 15. Gregory Rousseau, he's been driving it. He's been going up in people's draft boards as very recently. Jalen Phillips, he was actually covered very recently by Brett Coleman as a very kind of as a hybrid player to, I think he said, the Bosa brothers.
Yeah, hybrid to the Bosa, a hybrid of the Watt brothers, like both JJ and TJ fitting right in the middle of their size and skill set.
Right. And in terms of free agents, like I think they should potentially go for a young edge rusher, because in terms of free agents, there's not a whole lot of young edge rushers that they can get on a relatively cheap deal. And a lot of the ones that are there at the top, like Jadeveon Clowney, are well past their prime, and I don't think can add a whole lot. And they'll just add to some of the older linemen where they should invest young in that position. Melvin Ingram, in my opinion, probably the most skilled free agent in the edge position, coming out of the Chargers after they cleaned house a little bit with the signing of Brandon Staley. So he did benefit a lot from being a complementary piece to Joey Bosa in the scheme that they ran back in Los Angeles. But he might ask for a very hefty tag because he's not too far removed from his prime in the mid-2010s. Justin Houston and Olivier Vernon are some other guys. Houston's pretty old himself. Olivier Vernon, not as old, but I feel like they should draft somebody. Vernon's not a bad option, depending on how much they are willing to give him. But they probably should keep the average age of the D-line, I'd say, pretty young.
They did also sign Efe Obada, the British defensive end from Carolina. He is solid as a rotational guy, but he is not going to be the permanent answer for that position. They also lost a veteran, Trent Murphy, or not lost so much as haven't re-signed Trent Murphy yet. So that could mean they're looking to get a lot younger at the position and not target somebody like a Vernon or a Ingram or a Clowney.
Exactly. I'd probably say they draft someone like Ojulari, who's probably going to fall there. Jalen Phillips would be a steal, but that's another great pick that they can get at 30th. With that, we're going to be moving on to the second most important need for the Dolphins that we feel is the defensive back position, entailing both corner and safety. So they have a decent defensive back core, but once again, either aging or relatively inexperienced. They haven't signed Josh Norman yet. He's still an unrestricted free agent, had a pretty lackluster last season with the Bills, didn't make a whole lot of plays. Honestly, was pretty on the DL. Benefited greatly from being on the other end of Tre'Davious White, so he didn't have to cover wide receiver ones. Tre'Davious White had a pretty respectable season, probably not up to the standards that he has had in past years, but he's a solid lockdown cornerback. Bit of a down year, but I think he's definitely going to have a resurgence as the defense grows stronger. But in order for that to happen, they need to invest more in the defensive back position. I think Micah Hyde is another guy who is, I think, arguably the leader of the defense, or at some capacity he is, but he's still aging and he doesn't have quite the level of skill that he used to. Tre'Davious White and someone like Jordan Poyer, who is the free safety for the Buffalo Bills, they're more skilled guys. So all three are rated above a 68 on PFF, with Poyer and White being rated above 70s. The latter two are actually in their mid-70s for pass coverage and tackling ability. And Poyer actually recorded 86 solo tackles in 2020 that helped them build a more physical identity for themselves in terms of how well their cornerbacks and their secondary in general can tackle. A lot of the physicality on defense comes from the tackling ability of not just your front seven, but also your secondary. And Jordan Poyer helped kind of drill that blue collar mindset into the secondary with his physicality and his way of play. So they haven't signed Josh Norman, like I mentioned. They also haven't signed Dean Marlowe. Had a bit of a down year as well, but they haven't signed him. Guys like Casey Hayward, like we mentioned for the Jets, is another good option. Steven Nelson coming out of the Steelers. A bit of a controversial one there because he did also kind of give up a lot of blown coverage and not didn't perform as well on one-to-one assignments on certain, mainly I would say wide receiver twos, even when they were bracketed with guys like Minka Fitzpatrick in that team. Brian Poole coming out of the Jets, also underutilized by Adam Gase, missed a couple games for personal reasons, I believe. He's another guy that I think can have a resurgence if they were signed to this team on a relatively player-friendly deal. Richard Sherman is another guy on a lot of people's radars, but if you have trouble at that position, his name has been floated with a bunch of different teams, not just the Bills. Malik Hooker, Kenny Vaccaro, Duron Harmon. They're also guys that you can get on relatively cheap deals. Shouldn't overpay for, but they're pretty serviceable at the cornerback positions as well. In the safety positions as well. All right.
Just one more final point. It's not, when we're talking about teams like the Bills, it's not that they're bad at these positions. It's just there are things that might want to consider. A lot of these guys on the defensive back may warrant bigger contracts in free agency in the coming years. So you may need to worry about, having depth under them, which they do have. Obviously, Taron Johnson, who had that crucial pick six in the playoff game versus Lamar Jackson that sealed the game. Mm-hmm. He is a good rotational guy. A player like Levi Wallace is also a good rotational guy, but they may look to add more in the second round, maybe the third round, trying to find value to replace. Not with the talent they have. They're not going to use their premium pick on a cornerback unless somebody like a Caleb Farley maybe falls that far, but I don't put a lot of stock in them falling as far as 30 to the Bills. Mm-hmm. So look for them to try and add value later in the draft rather than try to get the star player in the first round.
Yep, that's a pretty good assessment in my opinion as well. You got to go for the best player at that point, even though I highly doubt it happens. So the next position of need, the penultimate one, we feel is on the offensive line. And I'm not going to lie, the Bills have actually had an improved offensive line from past years. I feel like they've matured alongside their franchise quarterback in Josh Allen over the past few years. It was very raw in the last couple of years, even in the Tyrod Taylor years where you very frequently saw him scramble all over the place in order to just make a play. He was very quick on his feet as well. They relied on LaShawn McCoy doubling up as a slot receiver in order to just, get some gainage on yards. But this offensive line, while it is a need, truth be told, it's very much improved. And it's been pretty impressive how they've done it with relatively, lesser known guys. So the main guys that are notable, that are still under contract by the Bills, who've actually been playing pretty well and have contributed to the success of the line, have been center Mitch Morse, a guy who can double up as both a tackle and a guard in Cody Ford, and their tackle Dion Dawkins. They've all been solid this past year, and they should, and I think will be retained for the inevitable Super Bowl push that will happen next season. Some other free agents right now that they haven't re-signed yet are guard John Feliciano and tackle Darrell Williams. And I think these two especially are going to be top priorities for the Bills to re-sign. Perhaps they're just waiting out the market to see, if there's anyone willing to re-sign them, and they might get them back on cheaper deals in a relatively dry market, like well after free agency. And the Bills O-line actually did struggle with that Feliciano, giving him some leverage in the upcoming.
Actually, sorry to stop you right there. They did re-sign Feliciano to a 3-year contract, a 3-year, $14.4 million contract extension. So they do have Feliciano locked up.
Oh, my bad.
It's no worries. They also added a guard Forrest Lamb from the Chargers. So they have made some improvements on the offensive line, but they obviously may want to add, first of all, they may want to add depth, and they also may want to look for younger guys to develop. So they're not going to spend a premium pick on on the offensive line.
Yeah,
They're
I think
probably going to find late round value. But,
exactly.
Mitch Morse is 28, Feliciano is 29, Darrell Williams is 28. Deion Dawkins is one of the younger ones of the bunch. He's 26. And then Cody Ford is probably the youngest. He's 24. So they may want to use their late round picks to find any young offensive linemen they feel they can work with and mold to step up in case one of their starters goes down with injury. Like I said, with the defensive back position, just because we have them on this list, that doesn't mean they're bad at the position. It just means that that's the place on their offense or on their team that they could probably improve at relative to the rest of the team and the rest of the league.
Exactly. And just one final point I want to make about the line. In terms of free agents, because I don't think, like I said, like Vinay actually mentioned, they might look for more late round value and build up the defense a little bit because O-line hasn't been as much of a concern as the defense has been as of late for the Bills. I think they can target a guy off of free agency, maybe on a one-year deal. I know one-year deals have been very popular as of late, especially amongst teams that are ready to make playoff pushes. And, old O-linemen and even the Bills may not be ready to sign guys on the free agent market to long-term deals right now because they can be injury prone and they are pretty aging. I feel like some guys include in terms of the guys that I'm talking about would include Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, both tackles that got released by the Chiefs this offseason, right before they signed Joe Thuney as guard. Alejandro Villanueva, kind of undermentioned. He's a very, very premier tackle, I think, coming out of the Steelers. They haven't re-signed him yet, but he was a big reason that the Steelers O-line has consistently been top 5 in the league, in my opinion, for the past several years. And Russell Okung as well. I believe he got released from the Panthers, or he hasn't been re-signed by the Panthers after the Trey Turner-Okung trade in 2019. So those are 4 premier tackles right there. It will boost their line for years to come, at least in the upcoming year, if they get even one of these guys. They're all Pro Bowlers, except somehow Mitchell Schwartz, even though he has 3 second-team All-Pro nods, but not a single Pro Bowl, which is strange, but, it shows that he's an elite run and pass blocker. And acquiring any one of them would be a solid get for Buffalo to bolster their line. So I don't know if they will, given their cap situation, but it would be a solid move to get him on even a one-year deal to bolster their line. And the final position of need we feel for the Bills will be linebacker. So they have made some interesting moves at linebacker and some predicted moves as well. I think the biggest one that has been talked about as of late has been the Matt Milano signing. So he signed to a team-friendly 4-year, $44 million deal. And he vastly outplayed his rookie deal. And a large part of that is because the culture at Buffalo is really, really strong. And it's a place that players want to come back to. They may not have won it all last year, the year before that, but there's a lot of potential there. And there's a culture of winning, and there's a culture of excellence and respect mutual between front office, coaching, and the players that allowed them to do that. So that's a very good look on the part of the Bills organization. So I would say his deal was a complete steal. He's strong in coverage, both man and zone. He's great at blitzing, and he's a really good, hefty playmaker all over the field. He's a very versatile linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds is another great player who actually had another Pro Bowl season, and he's only 22. He got drafted as a teenager alongside his brother, Terrell Edmonds, who went to the Steelers back in 2018, I believe it was. So, yeah, he's been a fantastic addition to the Bills. Just made a Pro Bowl, like I said. Finished second in tackles amongst the Bills' defense, only behind Jordan Poyer, who played one more game than him, actually, and he only had a few less tackles than him. He's also strong in coverage and blitzing, very similar to Matt Milano, and versatile. AJ Klein is another guy that I really like on that defense. He struggled in coverage a bit in 2020, which is why I think they can kind of address their defensive back needs a little bit. because he did allow 73% of passes thrown his way to be completed, which is one of the higher ones. I'd say top 10% in the entire league. He also led Bills linebackers in pass breakups because of how often he was targeted. So kind of goes both ways, but he's a little inconsistent in pass coverage because of how often opposing quarterbacks, feel comfortable in throwing his direction. So when Edmonds was healthy, actually, he had a midseason surge in sack numbers. And that's mainly because blitzing quarterbacks and putting pressure on the quarterback is a position that naturally suits him well, as opposed to pursuing receivers or basically pass coverage in any way. So I think if he's mainly put as a blitzer. Same with AJ Klein, where you have Matt Milano playing a kind of inside and outside linebacker, kind of going all over the field, where he can show his dynamic playmaking skills, like he put it on full display. That will be ideal. I think there's not a whole lot of linebackers in free agency right now. The one that's stuck out to me immediately was Quan Alexander. Currently, there's not a whole lot other linebackers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he is the one that I think can add a lot of value to the team at a relatively cheap contract. And he was fantastic with the Niners in their Super Bowl push as well. He was a playmaker, even with the Bucks, forced a lot of fumbles, he recovered a lot of fumble recoveries, and he was a great tackler as well. He's a playmaker all over the field. Other than that, I think 30th overall, they're still going to address edge, maybe defensive back. And I don't know if Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah out of Notre Dame or Micah Parsons out of Penn State are going to fall that far. If they do, I think you got to take the best player on the board, even though I'm 99.9% sure they're not going to fall to 30. They're probably going to be taken in the top 15, actually. They can make a play for Nick Bolton at Mizzou. Fantastic tackling ability. And he can stifle offenses with his physical style of play. Zaven Collins is another one. I don't know if you've done a lot of research in him.
I really, really like Zaven Collins. Out of Tulsa, very small, relatively small school. It's at the AAC. He is the Bednarik Award winner, the Nagurski Award winner, and the Lombardi Award winner. Although that's based on leadership and character, so that kind of tells you who the guy is. Incredibly intelligent, built 6'5", 260 pounds, so he is also physically gifted. An elite run stopper. I feel like he may not be there. Some mock drafts have him falling into the second round. I don't think he escapes 26 if Parsons and Owusu-Koramoah go in the top 15. 26, he's going to Cleveland.
Right.
So I doubt he's going to be available for the Bills to take at number 30. If he is there, I would definitely jump all over Zaven Collins. He's extraordinarily gifted and intelligent, and he's somebody that almost any team would love to have.
Another guy I really like is Jabril Cox. He hasn't been receiving a lot of first-round buzz, potentially being taken as a second or third-round guy as linebacker. He almost can be seen, in my opinion, from the tape that I watched of him, as like Owusu-Koramoah light, because he's a very good coverage linebacker. He makes a lot of physical plays in tight man coverage. He's very hard to get separation from, and I haven't really seen that in a whole lot of linebackers. It's almost at cornerback level on man coverage, which is what I really like about him. He's a very lean guy, but he makes his presence felt, especially in the middle of the field. So he can definitely run the field ragged and cover guys. Like, he covers them in a very tight-knit manner, which I really liked about his game. And he's very good in pass defenses. So not sure if they're going to address linebacker in the first round. They probably won't. They'll probably choose an edge rusher, or if a really, really good cornerback prospect falls to 30, they might go there. But if they don't have a guy that they like at number 30 for either edge or on the secondary, I think they might go linebacker. There's a lot of guys that can be taken, including Nick Bolton, Zaven Collins, Jabril Cox. very pragmatically, because I don't think Parsons or Cormo are going to be available at 30.
Yeah. So that basically about wraps up the need for the Bills. A very talented team, and one of my favorites to win it all in 2021 with the team that Brandon Beane has built and Sean McDermott has coached up. It will definitely give the Chiefs a run for their money in the AFC, and could potentially finally end that championship drought in upstate New York and bring one of the best fan bases in the nation a championship.
Absolutely. And with that, we will conclude this episode. Thank you so much for listening.